Good evening, everyone. You're very, very welcome to this talk called Lockdown Learning, a survival guide for parents. I'm certainly raising expectations with that title. It's certainly never a talk that I'd imagined giving in my speaking career, but I'm very delighted to be here. And I really hope that even one or two tips gets you through the next this week and in the weeks to come. So just a little tiny bit of housekeeping. I believe that you need to sign in if you want to add comments. So you sign in on YouTube in order to post comments. And this is obviously a live talk, but also just to be aware, if you're watching it later on, you're very welcome. So it will be recorded as well. So just a very warm welcome to you. And as you know, maybe you were at last week's talk on parenting in a pandemic, which is part of this series. And I'm hoping some of those tips were beneficial to you, and maybe you tried out one or two things. The same, advice applies to this talk. I always advise parents, rather than trying to jot everything down or, just listen out for one or two things that you might take and try over the coming weeks. It's always a good idea at the end of the talk to think, what can I take away? What can I use tomorrow? So don't worry too much about jotting too much down. I think you should always just think about what resonates for your child, okay? I am conscious that these talks in this series are for, parents of children of all ages. And remember, I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. And I've tried to put in content that is just as applicable for when you've got a 15-year-old as whether you've got a 10-year-old or even a younger child. It's just a matter of taking it and sort of applying it accordingly for the age that you're is. Okay. My very, very first point that I'd like to make is, the dream of lockdown learning as opposed to the reality. What is it meant to be like? This is a picture that I use in loads and loads of my talks because it always makes me chuckle. I certainly have never done that with my children in that way. Certainly, it's extremely unmessy, isn't it? And everybody's getting along and everybody's hair's perfect and it's just completely unrealistic. So when you're actually, a speaker like I am in schools and you're looking for a stock image, they put up these unrealistic images of how lockdown learning is actually meant to be. And we're all meant to be fantastic teachers suddenly. We're all able, we're all meant to have our children being able to, know what to say to them and have them focused and engaged. So for those of you with younger children, you will know that children under the age of 5, under the age of 10, it can be hard, really, really hard. But these are the idyllic messages that we're meant to be out having glorious walks and beautiful clothes and enjoying all those lovely times together during the school day when we're outside, and maybe our children, have a little rest in a tree, over break time. Now, this is the reality, and this was my house yesterday. So this is my 11-year-old at 8 a.m. at the prospect of another day's lockdown learning, and at 4 o'clock when he'd finished. The point is, in between that time, happily, he was very focused and engaged, and he's doing a great job. He's trying to stay resilient. And it's the bit in between that I really want to help with. Nobody said it would be easy. It's not easy. It's not easy for anyone. And it's hard, when they have to get up in the morning and sit at that computer. And, at the end of the day, it's exhausting. And then we have to try and get them out into the outdoor space. It's hard, right? It's very hard. But hopefully, the bits in between I can help with. Okay. And I'm hoping that some of my advice will really resonate this evening. The other, the reality is some of us are working. Some of you are working with very young children in the house, which is extremely difficult as well, and juggling that balance. Plus, instead of our children sort of, doing a little bit of that, there's a lot more of this going on, gaming. So there is a lot going on in everyone's home And it's important that we do separate out, fact from fiction. It can feel a lot more like this. This is another picture that makes me chuckle because, everyone has felt that sense of stress. And I think it's important to remember that we are all in the same boat, albeit if you have much younger children, I would argue it is much more difficult. Because if you are working, etc., etc. So, there is the reality versus, the sort of the glorious image. So just be reassured that we're all in the same boat. And, I'm hoping this talk tonight will give you some practical tips, maybe one or two that might help you cope better right now. I want to talk about something a little bit broader because I want you to understand the power of parental engagement in children's learning more generally. So pre-pandemic, I was giving a lot of talks on parental engagement in learning. That's one of my passions in life, is helping parents understand how powerful they are and how some small things at home can have an enormous impact on your child's ability to thrive academically. So I'm going to bring all of those, pepper the talk with that stuff. And I want to reflect on what we've learned about learning and how children learn during this period. That will be invaluable when they all go back to school and we get back to normal life. So there's a lot to learn in this process, as difficult as it is. I want to inspire you to try out a few new things. I know many of you have emailed me about motivating and how do I encourage my child? What do I do when my child is struggling? And I'm going to try and give you a few tips in that regard. So remember, you've probably been to some of my resilience talks before, or I may have mentioned reframing last week as a component in resilience. So it's very, very important that we start to reframe, to extract all the things that we've learned from lockdown. I think it's fantastic that we appreciate teachers more and the science of learning and how complex it is and the great skills it takes to enable a child to concentrate and to motivate them and how to help them when they're struggling and how to, help them, stay focused and aspirational, etc. It's a hard job. And we understand how important school is to children's mental health and well-being and development, intellectual development, academic development, physical development. We now know the value of importance of play and friendships for their mental health. We appreciate the value of competitive sport and other opportunities in school. We will never complain about any of those things again because suddenly we really understand their true value. And I think that's a fantastic lesson to come out of lockdown. Here's a little action tip for you. Over the weekend, as we move into half term, ask your children what has gone well. So I asked my children what has gone well earlier today. And they said, well, we've been able to ask Dad chemistry questions during lessons because he's not normally here. And we've had break times in the snow because school doesn't allow snowball fights. And my snacks apparently are better than drinking biscuit at school. Being able to ask big brother stuff in the next room. No school run, so it's easier to get homework done, which leaves more time to relax. And what I'm doing in asking my children that is I'm helping them understand that at the end of this episode in our lives, on return to school, we can sum up what we've learned, what we're taking from this experience, and how we will grow from it. We will learn from it. We will be better people because of it. We will, have a greater appreciation for so much. So I want you this weekend to say to your children, what has gone well? It's terribly easy with the news and these sort of narratives about the bleakness of lockdown. And it is hard, but also there are things that have been positive about it. And I certainly know many families as I know who find it hard. Some children have flourished with online learning, lockdown learning. So it's a real mixed bag, but I think for all of us, we need to work hard. It feels good to think about the things that have gone well. and give yourself a pat on the back for these things, that the way in which you've supported your child and done your very, very best in very difficult circumstances. Barriers to lockdown learning that parents are telling me: being poorly organized. So, one parent I was speaking to today, she'd realized she'd no printer paper. So they couldn't find any printer paper, so they couldn't print out their teenage son's workbook, etc., etc. So, organization has been very stressful for families. Poor communication. So one parent thinking the other one was on duty with the 6-year-old when the other one had a meeting. So, we can hear already the things that we can do there are being highly organized about our holistic family schedules over this period. Poor digital hygiene and etiquette. There are all sorts of things going on with pupils, speaking to each other on social media, interrupting each other in the middle of online learning, with emojis pouring in and all sorts of stuff. But that's where we have to tell our children and talk to our children, no matter what age they are, about our expectations when they're doing their online learning. We don't expect them to be playing Fortnite while they're doing their online learning. We don't expect them to interrupt their friend when he's speaking to the teacher. So there's a lot of etiquette that I think parents need to take an interest in. Ambivalence around expectation. So a lot of parents are torn between, oh, do you know what? Look, let's just let them do whatever they like, and we'll focus on learning a lot later. And sort of sometimes it feels like children are on holiday. And I would argue that, and you probably know I'm going to say this, that it's, we need to remind children that this is school time. This is school day time. Even if they're sitting in their bedroom on that computer, it's school time. And I think the expectation, if you maintain and try and sustain children's work ethic, it's easier to transition back to school eventually. So, being in their pajamas all day and maybe dipping in and doing a little bit of homework is not ideal. We want to give them that sense of the school week, that sense that now it's half term. Even as artificial as that might feel, it's very important. Parental irritation. It's very easy to lose temper or be impatient with children, and because we're not, professional teachers, so it's hard for us. And children's lack of motivation. I know that is a big issue in many, many homes. It's totally understandable, but there are lots of things you can do and say, which we'll talk about, that can enable you to ease that. The difficulty of managing personal workload and children's schoolwork. So how is it for you? If we were in a physical talk now, I would ask people around the room. And I think it's a good idea, again, to reflect on what have been the barriers for you to doing it well. Where are the flashpoints? That's always a fantastic question. You can hear that I'm suggesting you audit how things have gone. What has worked well? What could we do better in the weeks following half term? Hopefully, which is the last lap of lockdown. Let's hope it is. So you can understand that there is a reckoning, there's a discussion about all of that positive stuff and the things that we can work on. How can we make it really, hopefully on that last lap, hopefully, after half term, how can we make it work better? How can we do better? How can we try harder and differently? One of the big messages in all of my parenting talks is to encourage all of us to not do things that don't work. If something doesn't work, then we have to innovate. So if you're noticing that your 6-year-old is much more amenable to doing their maths when they're sitting on the beanbag as opposed to up at the kitchen table, don't keep asking them to go to the kitchen table. So where you see green shoots, you grab them. We don't repeat. If you ask your teenager to clean their room a certain way and you ask them that and they keep giving you a cheeky answer, we have to find a different way to ask the question or to, get them to do what we need them to do. So this is about flexibility of thinking. A great component of resilience is recognizing, well, that hasn't worked. Let's try something new. And that rhythm of resilience is very, very important when it comes to helping our children with their schoolwork. This is a really, really important slide. And I know it looks a bit odd, But I wanted to just tell you a little story about, and this reverts back to how learning works, okay? Years ago, I was invited to a primary school in Devon, Torquay actually, and the children had, there were many issues within the classroom, and the children had been through a lot. And I was there to evaluate a project, so I was actually just there as a researcher. And these children were taking part in a project about aspiration and what they wanted to be when they grew up. And the children who had a very strong sense of self, so the children who'd high self-esteem, you can see who they are in this picture, who knew who they were, who had high self-esteem, when it came to doing their identity box, a box that represented all the things that they loved in their life. These were 11-year-old children about to go to secondary school. You can see that for the children on the right, their sense of self, their self-esteem was very, very low. And there were very, complex family reasons for that. But it made me terribly sad at the time, because I could tell that those children, I could see why those children on the right were going to struggle in the classroom, how hard it is to learn when you are unhappy. And I just wanted to say that it's important for all parents to know this. Teachers know it, but we need to know it, that self-knowledge, all that gorgeous work that we do at home to help our children feel loved and valued and special for who they are and unique, and all the people that make up their life, their aunties, their uncles, their granny, their grandpa, their cat, their kittens, their dollies, anything. And especially for teenagers, that self-knowledge, who I am, that self-identity is extremely important for self-esteem. Self-esteem will predict resilience, and high self-esteem, when children have high self-esteem, they're much more likely to do better in the classroom with their learning and have that academic aspiration. So I wanted to make it very clear that it's important that we all understand that self-esteem, self-knowledge, self-identity underpins a child's ability to thrive in school. So that's a very important message. The other thing that is very, very important and important to remember is that school belongingness, so that feeling of belonging to that school in Tring, that is also something that keeps children feeling well, feeling mentally well, no matter what age they are. So even though they're not maybe physically at school, that sense, it's important that they, enjoy and try to get the most out of everything that the school can offer online, and have that sense of camaraderie and all those lovely things. So as hard as it is, that sense of school belonging, it's very hard to cultivate, but remembering it is an asset, and the lovely relationships that they enjoy with their teachers is an asset as well. That's something else that keeps them safe. The other thing to remember in terms of self-esteem and all that lovely feeling good about oneself before we learn is obviously extremely important, one-to-one time with parents. And that means, even it doesn't matter if you've got a 14-year-old or a 5-year-old, being with them, hanging out with them, having space and time to just hang out is a direct investment in how they feel about themselves. So half term, if you want to have a lofty goal, the lofty goal is just hanging out with them in a way that is fun, in a way that feels good, in a way that is attuned to what that child is interested in at that time. And it doesn't matter if you have to sit down and try and play Fortnite with your 15-year-old. That is attunement. That is you, as long as you're having fun, as long as you're trying to create and cultivate that closeness between you. Attunement is really listening out and thinking about what your child is interested in. And children will always give you the cue. I really like that picture on the right, because it shows that dad is really, really attuned to whatever that little girl has suggested he do. And you can tell it's very, very self-esteem boosting for children to have that interaction with their parent. This is actually a slide that I put in because a dad has emailed me from the audience tonight and asked about how he can, what's a good use of his time over half term. And as you can see, there's very specific advice, very specific research that points to fathers' involvement in play, predicting decreased externalizing and internalizing behavior and children's ability to be much more socially competent. So play is critically important no matter what age children are, and attuning to who they are as individuals is very, very important. The other oft neglected, fantastic resource in family life when it comes to learning, connecting, literacy, maths, everything, are board games. You literally cannot have enough board games in your house. I think we're working through all the board games in our house and trying to rate them at the moment. And sometimes it'll be hard to get a child, a teenager even, to come and play a game around that dinner table, but they do always end up having fun. And it's about just trying to have games that are fun and make you laugh and, get them thinking. So board games can have a very explicit goal when it comes to maths and English and talking about all those places on the Monopoly board, etc., etc. Or you can play games that are literally there to generate that sense of fun and relaxation. So board games are important. And we're still talking about, lockdown learning, break times, making sure that they are out. Do you know when break time is? Can you coordinate in any way between siblings to be out on the same break time, for you to be out, just to play a few games with them, have a laugh, even for 20 minutes? So lockdown break times are important. So it's important to keep an eye on that holistic family timetable. The other thing is, and I know, because we just know, it's common sense, that children, when they do physical exercise, they will learn better. And I could bore you with a whole hour's talk, which I won't, on the science behind that. But we know that aerobic exercise is an effective and easily implementable strategy for improving cognitive performance in children. So if you want your child to learn better and to keep learning well, you focus on getting them outside. And we know it's hard, but it's a very, very important aim. Many of you have spoken to me about your child struggling and having, aggressive tantrums when ordinarily that 5, 6, 7-year-old wouldn't be doing that. And you've seen a deterioration in their behavior. And that is something that has been echoed in the research evidence. So the Co-Space study, they're looking at how children are feeling and responding over this crisis. And we know from the last lockdown, children's behavior has got worse. We've seen an increase in temper tantrums, arguments, children not doing what they asked, so problems with compliance, and parents reporting greater levels of restlessness, fidgety behavior, and difficulties concentrating. So if you have a younger child and they're exhibiting that, I'm afraid you're not alone. Those are big issues in many, many households. And all of the things that I have just mentioned above will absolutely help, okay? So those are all things, all of those activities you need to amplify within lockdown. Also, think about, I'm sorry about how grainy this picture is, but I actually found it on my old phone the other day. And it's years ago when my eldest was helping my youngest read. And because I was really busy and I was cooking the dinner. And, it's important to remember that older siblings can also help with learning. So maybe you haven't thought of that, that the 14-year-old, the 13-year-old, the 17-year-old can help the 10-year-old. The 12-year-old can help the 6-year-old, can listen to them read, can read them a story. Maybe they can go into the den in the living room and read them a story. So think about who else can help you in this scenario. Don't be afraid to let an older sibling do a specific task, because what happens is they just become teacher, and they're brilliant at being teacher because they're used to children reading in class and it's an amazingly good experience, and most younger siblings really, really enjoy the older sibling being there with them. So see if you can mix it up a little bit. The other thing that I wanted to tell you, and this is straight from the mouth of Adele Diamond, and she's the top neuroscientist in the world who I interviewed for a recent podcast. And I was telling her, when my children are revising or they have a vocabulary test in French or Spanish or something, they go around the room on their skateboards. Now, you may not want anybody doing that in your house, but remember, movement is important in learning. And at home, our children, when they're revising or they're doing something or they're trying to remember something, they can move around. They can pass the ball between one another when they're doing their French verbs. They can do that. They can move around. And that physical activity, it just seems to help my children. And that's echoed in the literature. They can really make it a bit more interesting. So physical movement, is there a way in which you have the power to bring that into lockdown learning? Don't be afraid to do it, particularly when they are revising. So it might be you have a younger child who needs to do their numbers. Can they jump up and down on the trampoline in the garden if you have a trampoline? Can they just pass a ball between one another when they're doing their times tables? Can they do their spellings like that? We have to innovate in this space, and you will see big changes in your children when you mix it up a little bit, and they're not expected, all the time to be at that desk. That if you have some flexibility in where they're doing their learning and the context for that you can make some great inroads. Now, I want to introduce you to the idea of parental engagement, and make sure you come away from this talk knowing that pandemic or no pandemic, you are extremely powerful when it comes to how your child is doing academically, okay? So remember, schools can only work with the child that we send in every day. So when it comes back to children transitioning back to school, don't we want them to feel empowered and ready for that experience? So I need you to recognize how powerful we are at home, and that will never change. And all of the things I'm about to suggest to you, they will work. They are important whether or not we're in the middle of lockdown. So we know that parental aspiration for their children will strongly predict achievement. So our expectations, need to be realistic but high for our children. And we know that if parents engage with their education, we're certainly doing that. But I'm going to give you a few other little tips that are even away from that schoolwork and more about the stuff that you can do all the time in family life that will benefit your children academically. So let's ask, what is it we have to do? You are powerful. Look at this magnificent quote from Professor Charles DeForge, which drives my work. It doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. It's what you do with your children that matters. And I want to empower you to try some of the things, to appreciate some of the things that you can do in family life that we know from the research evidence matters a lot when it comes to academic attainment and doing well, okay? Number one, being there. So being there means that you take an interest in your child's performance at school, how they're doing. You are there alongside them. You are taking an interest. You're asking them questions. This is slightly for maybe older children, even older children. They need to know that you care, that you're interested, that you do have high aspirations, that you believe in them. And that is really important. So having those expectations and aspirations, but also showing them that you believe in them and that you are there for them, no matter what, is critically important. So it's very important when you think about parental engagement and learning to think about what you believe in. What are your values? What do you believe about education? So you could fill out that little slide. You could say, we believe that, teachers, we can work in alignment, in partnership with teachers. We respect teachers. We believe that we have a role to play at home in making sure our children are ready for learning in school. We are passionate about learning in our home. We understand that we have a powerful role to play in shaping our children's aspirations, etc., etc. So whatever you believe matters in this space. The other thing that matters is being organized. And I don't mean that your home is highly organized in general. I mean organized for learning. So this is actually extraordinarily important yet simple. Making sure your children, when they need a pencil sharpened, it's there. When they need to understand how this is particularly important for children as they move into the GCSE years and A-level years, even when I'm supervising doctoral students, the first thing I say to them is, you get organized. Have you got dictionaries to hand? Have you got pencils, a rubber, a tin of little rubbers that you can dip into? Do you know where all of your subjects are and all of the things and those little folders that you can see there, they're very, very cheap from IKEA. So you can do this without spending a lot of money. But my question is, is there anything you can do to be more organized at the minute that would help you as a family? So just have a look. And if your children tell you they're bored over half term, like mine did over the Christmas holidays, you get them to sit and sharpen all the pencils. They really, really enjoy that activity. The other thing to remember, and this is straight from the neuroscience, is that breakfast matters. Breakfast, even in lockdown, and you're thinking about they're moving into the bedroom to go on, online school, breakfast is one of the greatest assets when it comes to learning and memorizing and concentrating for learning. So again, if you have much younger children, it's a good idea to do a preschool run around the garden, run around the house, then come in for a hearty breakfast. Try and put the emphasis on breakfast a lot more at the moment, and see if you can notice a change in concentration levels in your children. Where your child is learning matters. Some children do not want to be at a desk. They might be more comfortable sitting up with some cushions against the sofa with their laptop on their knee. Whatever is comfortable for them is very, very important. And it might be, they're being disturbed by another sibling, but think about, are they comfy? Ask them, are you comfortable in that chair? Sometimes children don't consider their own comfort when they're in these sorts of positions because they're just used to learning. So mix it up a little bit. Maybe after half term, I'm certainly going to move my children around so that they feel it's a little bit more interesting and different, and maybe try and, even have them in the same room. I don't know, but just try and consider some of those aspects. The other thing is, before they go on online learning, it is important to maintain the expectation. You're going to school. Good luck in school today. If children are autonomous, so if they're working on their own without you, or if you have younger children and you're working alongside them, it's important to say, now we're going into school mode. So you try and help them transition psychologically. It's also important to maintain that we still have to be kind to other people, especially online. People can be very, very sensitive at the moment. We emphasize trying our best. We emphasize good behavior, speaking nicely to teachers, etc., etc. And we emphasize that we still expect homework to be done because it's school time. It's school term time. And I think it is extremely important to try and maintain those expectations. The other thing is, some of you have asked me about homework. Is homework important in the middle of lockdown? Well, the thing is, homework is always important. And homework often gets a bad press because people just think, I don't want to be doing homework after school. It's too much pressure on children. But I'm just going to share with you some of the things the research says about homework that might help. So first of all, homework has been proven to lead to an attainment gain for primary age children of about 2+ months. And it's even better at secondary school, where it can be as much as 5+ months. Why is that? Because homework is often about time spent with parents, and a parent might take a topic like magnets and they might talk about it, and they might tell their children a story about it, or they might, they take a concept and they discuss it. So homework is very important when it's done well. It is most effective when it takes place in a family culture that values learning more generally. And this is a really important point. Encourage your child to reflect on their homework. What did that homework make you think about? It's called metacognition, developing an understanding of how they learn and think. And by monitoring, evaluating, and discussing tasks they've completed or they're working on, all of that is linked to children's improvements in learning, attainment, and motivation. So saying to your child, what was for homework? What was it like? How did you approach it? How will you approach that task? What did you take away from that experience of doing that homework, etc., etc. So reflection is a very important component that we can help our children with. Somebody asked me about animals. Cats on laps are absolutely acceptable during homework and even lockdown learning because animals reduce anxiety. So when your little cat is asleep on your child's lap and they're doing their work, don't think they're being distracted, because we know from the neuroscience that animals are anxiety reducing. So I think it's fantastic that children benefit from their animals being around when they're learning. It's amazing. The other thing to say about homework is it's much more about quality than quantity. So if you have a younger child, try and see the homework as a springboard for rich discussion in family life. And then you'll be knowing that you're doing a great job with it. You and I are our children's first teachers. And you and I will all have taught a child to ride a bike at one point. And it just shows you this experience of teaching a child to ride a bike, how much we know about learning intuitively. We know that it's hard. We know they might have to take it in little steps. We know how to encourage them. We know they're going to fall down and hurt themselves when they're riding that bike the first couple of times. And we need to sort of provide the sort of stabilizers potentially in those early experiences. So we know a lot about how our children learn, and we know how amazing they feel when they finally develop that autonomy and are able to do things for themselves. But there's something when you're sitting with your child doing their work, I want to introduce you to this idea of scaffolding, which is very, very commonplace. Teachers know all about it, but parents often aren't familiar with the term. So before you're engaging with your child's working with them, you're the scaffolding, you want to scaffold the conversation. Try and make sure you feel good first, okay? So make sure you're feeling okay. You've got your cup of tea, you've got your biscuit, you're feeling okay. You've thought about what you need to do. And this is for parents potentially who have to work this alongside their child, okay? Try and think about what task we're doing and how we're going to do it. So you might spend 5 minutes saying to your child, now, we've been told you have to write an essay today. What do we know about it? How can we approach it? What's our plan of action? And you can have that chat walking around the block. You don't have to have it sitting at the computer. So focus on how you're feeling, on the quality of connection with your child, and hold steady. So as they start the task, or with older children, as you're watching them engage with their learning, just stay calm. Let them try and figure it out. Stay on their level. Don't talk down to them. Just listen to them. So this is the beginning of that scaffolding conversation. So we are there as that support. The Education Endowment Foundation is a really important organization that teachers and schools use, which provide the best evidence base when it comes to all things to do with children and learning. And I just snapshotted this earlier from their website. I wanted to just show you, this is a lovely, gorgeous diagram where they try and teach parents some of the things that are really, really important when you're doing the homeschooling. So it's it'll echo some of the things I've been saying, but it might be a very useful slide. to maybe just take a quick picture of. So taking turns to make plans and predictions before starting a task, they suggest. So, what do you think? I wonder how many fish fingers everybody would like for tea. What do you think? So this is where we can hear that a great component in parental engagement in children's learning is getting them to think. And before you start the learning task together, you think about it, you reflect on it, you predict, you think about, you plan it together. So you don't just jump into the learning task, you have a plan of action and you help your child come up with suggestions around that task. Secondly, recapping to check ideas. So you think we should do that. Why is that? Why do you think that happened? So you're recapping. You can already hear the greatest value that we have in these interactions is asking questions. Using encouragement and praise to keep them engaged in the learning. I love your ideas for Grandma's picture. Wow. You have thought so carefully about your picture. I wonder what it would look like with stars on. What do you think? So you can hear that ideally the language of motivation is built into your affirmations and the interaction between parent and child. The other thing, the S in trust, is about sharing prior knowledge and past experiences. So you're trying to connect the fact you're doing something on magnets in science with your child with something that happened. Do you remember the time Grandpa had a magnet and he sucked up all the iron filings when we were out at that, when we were sitting around the dinner table? So you try and jog their memory with past memories that can connect them to this learning. We have the power as parents to put learning into context, and that is richer than anything. T, tune in, listen to your child. So what is it that your child is interested in? Whatever it is, you feed into it. If they're interested in cars and they're young children, read about cars, watch cars, play with cars, talk about cars, teach them maths through cars. Everything could be taught through that whatever they're interested in. So those are some very beautiful little tips from the Education Endowment Foundation I hope you find useful. The other thing to remember in all of our homes is that we need to remember, and from teaching them to ride a bike, that learning is hard. It should be hard because we're learning. So we're not expecting them to know stuff because they're learning. And something that's really, really important, this is a very important researcher in the world of education research, Dylan William. He says, if students do not have to work hard to make sense of what they're learning, then they're less likely to remember it in 6 weeks' time. So actually, when your child has to puzzle something out, that is the core, the rich core of learning. That's what they should be doing. So don't be afraid of your child puzzling things out, working it out, taking their time to work it out and get it right. That is the essence of learning. When you are playing with them, I did mention board games earlier, but it's not just about, the skill set and the learning to do with the Lego, for example, or the Monopoly. Children's emotional intelligence you can work on during those times. So this is lockdown learning, +2, thinking about their emotional intelligence, helping them with their soft skills. Well done for focusing. You're so patient and you're able to just be very, very gentle with that brick. So you are scaffolding here. You are nudging, praising, encouraging, and really noticing when your child is persistent, when they are resilient, and when they, exhibit the kind of behavior that you want them to show all the time. So when you are empowering them in those moments, celebrate the little wins. Praise them for working out something well. Little nudges that open up their thinking. So that mum might be saying, what do you think happens if we add another block? Would that reinforce it? Would that make the block with the tower a little bit wobbly? What do you think? The whole essence of the interaction between us is that we're trying to open up their thinking. Gently does it. So we don't want to rush in. We don't want to, parents often, we can rush our children, whereas teachers are the most patient people in the world, and they understand the value of silence and the value of giving children time. Children often figure things out for themselves, but often we parents can be a little bit impatient. All builders need breaks. So when you'll notice your child may be doing something where they're deeply, deeply engaged, and then they'll need a break. So the rhythm of physical exercise, outdoor learning, a little bit of everything is a good rhythm to be in that will benefit learning. All of you will probably have heard of growth mindsets, and I'm sure many of your schools use these approaches, but I just want to remind you of the growth mindset approach. It is very important that we stick to it, I think, in parenting at the moment. So if your child believes that their intelligence isn't fixed, that they're, for young children, their brains can grow and, you can become more intelligent, the more likely, if they believe that, then they're more likely to enjoy learning, question, propose ideas, try new things, overcome challenges. So, for example, how does that apply in practice? You can say to your 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old, the more you read, the bigger your brain capacity becomes. The more you know. It's like you can just fill that brain with magnificent things and you can become more intelligent over time. So if children think it's all shut down and, they only know what they know and they can't improve, they're less likely really to try. So this is the essence of a growth mindset. We want to veer towards the blue, and just all of us will experience spots of feeling we've a fixed mindset, not really wanting to be challenged, or wanting to give up when we're frustrated, or feeling criticism is very, very personal, feeling that we're not really making progress. Whereas we want our children to like new things, to see making mistakes as an opportunity to grow and learn, and seeing challenges as helping them grow. So praising their effort, all of those lovely things. So that's something to aim for in lockdown. That will certainly complement the work that schools are doing in this regard. So when your child expresses what I would call a gremlin thought, I'm rubbish at this, then we need to remind ourselves, that of helping them see that they have made progress, and using the language of growth mindset in your home is very, very important. So how do you do that when they have those gremlin thoughts? The big word, teachers will use this, but maybe parents don't know to use this. I can't do this. And you might say, well, you can't do it yet. So yet is a word full of hope and promise. And most importantly, it's full of parental belief in that child. I know you're going to get this eventually. You just haven't got it yet. So that's a little tip that might work. So here's an example. And normally in physical talks, we'd all put our hands up, so this is just a little quiz to see if everybody's been listening. Do you think it helps or hinder to say some of these things to your child? So, and you're very welcome to put answers in the chat if you feel like actually pressing the buzzer. So when our child does a test, you got 95%. What did you get wrong? Is that helping or hindering? Answer, hindering, obviously. I love it when you ask great questions. That's helping. How might we find out the answer? Helping. It was tricky, but you kept going. Helping, motivating. I love the way you handled that. Motivating. Your brother tries hard, why don't you? As soon as a child hears that, their self-esteem goes down. They feel much more irritated by their brother, so it doesn't help the sibling relationship, and it's counterproductive. You're amazing. Look at this. You're just like Picasso. When you compare your child and tell them they're absolutely amazing, at something, well, there's no room for growth. What we should do really instead is ask them, you've made that beautiful picture. Tell me how you did it. Get them thinking and reflecting on how they did it, on the process, on how long they took. So you're valuing the effort rather than the outcome. I've told you the answer already. That's going to hinder, because no child is going to want to ask you anything or me anything if we react like that. So that's a demotivating response. I always love to hear what you think. That is like the sun shining on your child's face when a parent responds in that way. So really it's about thinking about what we can do in family life to motivate and sustain that motivation. The normalization of mistakes, just as you accepted mistakes when they were learning to ride a bike, we have to infuse family life with, oh, do you know what? I've made that mistake before. Yeah, this is the tricky bit, the exciting bit. I'm getting frustrated now. I better slow down and take a deep breath. So we need to normalize mistakes in family life and have that bounce back script. Well done for spotting that mistake. I hadn't noticed it. Well done for giving it your best shot. Let's think about what we can learn for next time. Onwards and upwards, So you can hear that a lot of this stuff is about making sure those gremlin thoughts are displaced or trumped by some of this more resilient language. So many of you have asked me about motivating. So hopefully you'll have heard that the way in which we speak to our children matters very much, but also from the neuroscience, we know that novelty activates the brain's reward system and holds our attention. So a new experience or a new way of encountering knowledge is likely to enhance learning. So what does that mean? Well, it means that, say your child is doing their times tables and they're just recounting their times tables. Suddenly, if you introduce that ball game where they're doing their times tables, that is much more interesting and novel, and they're much more likely, the brain is a bit more engaged in that activity. If your child is sitting there doing their Spanish vocabulary test revision, it's much more interesting to skateboard around the kitchen. So it's much more engaging. So you have to think, how can I focus on novelty in those weeks following half term? How can I experiment with this idea with my children? Very, very rewards and make them exciting. Predictable rewards are not enough to maintain motivation over a long period. So, for example, on a Saturday night, you might all celebrate, how well you've done during the week with the same thing. So basically, diversity, mixing it up a bit, is beneficial for children. Vary your praise. To increase impact, try using different words, a different tone of voice with younger children, different stickers, or getting someone else to give the praise. That is so exciting when you practice it and you realize somebody else going into the room and saying, whoa, I am so impressed with the way you stuck at that, or grandpa ringing them up and saying, do you know what? I've heard that you just sit at that desk all day. I'm really, really impressed. Mix it up. And when you see your child deeply engaged, don't interrupt them. So don't interrupt them to praise them. Wait till the task is over. So hopefully some of those will be beneficial for you. The other thing in family life at the moment that will impact on learning is we need to give them a chance to do stuff, to feel good, to win, to have success in other areas unrelated to schoolwork. So they should be offered choices, opportunity to pursue their own ideas and initiatives, and supported just enough without adults taking control and doing something for them that they can do themselves. I don't care what it is. I had my 14-year-old building a den in the garden with loads of wooden planks and a drill because I wanted him to have some agency and do something exciting that he was interested in, or build a go-kart, whatever it is, or your child might want to bake a cake. We have to find these opportunities for agency and autonomy. One of the greatest things, it would be a crying shame if we've been in lockdown with our children for so long and they don't come away from this experience. much more curious about the world. How do we model curiosity? And this is for parents of children of all ages. You say, do you know what? Come here. I was reading something fascinating today. Where do you hear this? Or what do you think about what's going on, with the impeachment of Donald Trump? Just open it up. I'm so excited to find out I wonder why that happens. Do you know why that happens? So curiosity, there isn't an employer in the world, there isn't a university or college in the world or a school in the world that does not want curious students. So our job is to open up our children's thinking at every single opportunity in lockdown. What do you think's happening? Why does that happen? How can we find out how many stars are in the sky? Can you think of a better way of doing this? So even when you're cooking with your 16-year-old, think about, is there a better way of doing this? What do you think? Remember that opening up their thinking, asking those questions will lead to what's called higher order thinking. One of the things that's fascinating, and this is a little trick we did before lockdown, when you're in the car with your children, nowadays they have their phone, their iPads, no time to think, no time to be curious. So I said to my husband, we're going to have a 20-minute iPad phone-free zone in the car, just to prove to you how children, when they're given an opportunity, will say amazing things and think amazing things, because they're staring out the window. So I did that, and within about 10 minutes into our journey on the country roads, suddenly, how do you know if there's a chick inside an egg before you crack it? How do hens mate? And why do I cry tears when I yawn? Were the 3 questions that had come up from looking out the window. And I think it's important to, we need, when we go back to that life, you need to make sure there are opportunities and spaces for children to have the opportunity to think in that way. So having a iPad phone-free time in the car is one way you can do it. And then you want to sustain your children's curiosity. I love it when this is sprinkling water and sunshine on that plant. I love it when you ask great questions. I love it how you're never afraid to try new things. I love the fact you're interested in how things work. This is it. This is how you motivate your child and sustain that curiosity. The other thing that would be a crying shame if we all left lockdown and it without understanding the importance of developing our children's language at home, their articulacy, their oracy. The amount of dialogue at home is the biggest predictor of children's eventual attainment. So you need to talk about everything, what they're interested in, what's going on politically, socially, what they're interested in play, their friendships. The more you can do, the better. And I always say, if you're interested in their English or whether they've fallen behind in English, well, all you need to do as a family is value language. I heard a really good word today. Listen to this. I don't even know what this word means. I'm going to look it up. Or can you use this word? Do you know what this word means? Playing Scrabble, really collecting words like shells on a beach, because when children can say it, they'll be able to write it. So one of the greatest assets for children's academic attainment is how we talk about things at home. And just collect words. For younger children, you might have a word of the week, and you just talk about that one word, a challenging word, for a week. So this isn't hard to do, but it's extremely valuable. We know that valuing reading, reading is important, but children who read for pleasure are significantly more likely to do better at school than their peers. So the more you can give that child access to books on topics that they love and enjoy, it's a significant investment in their future learning. And these are all things we can do in lockdown. If you have, primary age children, try and make reading interactive. So have little chats in between about what they are reading, talk about books that you're reading, and, the pause, prompt, praise, pause to let them, if they're working out words and they're very young and they get a little bit stuck, just try and be patient. You can provide a little clue, but don't give the answer, and praise them when they concentrate and puzzle it out and problem solve. So it's not about rushing through books. It's about dwelling and talking, and with slightly older children, talking about characterization and themes and characters and emotions and what it must feel like to be the protagonist in that story. This is the rich lockdown learning that we should be focusing on. The other thing that you may not have heard of this term is social and emotional learning. So I have talked a little bit about this earlier in the talk, but again, the Education Endowment Foundation draws our great attention to SEL. And I just want to highlight how much we can teach in this regard at this time. So try and expand children's emotional vocabulary. How are you feeling? You're feeling disappointed. You're feeling sad. Try and name and recognize those things. We can do that in lockdown. Self-regulation, so sharing. How do we all manage to make ourselves feel better when we're anxious, when we're cross? Are you modeling those coping strategies with your children? Social awareness, stories, discussing other people's emotions and perspectives. There's a rich opportunity to do that. The older your children are, the better. When you can talk about, why would someone have that perspective? What is it like to be them? Relationship skills. Well, now is the perfect time to practice better communication, to show our children how we argue, how we can argue well in family life, how we can actively listen to one another. And, sorry, I've repeated self-regulation there. And social awareness, I've repeated that as well, sorry. So you get the point that social and emotional learning is something that should form a part of your lockdown learning curriculum. So you might say, it looks like you're getting frustrated. I can see that this upsets you. I can tell you're a little bit disappointed. How do you think that feels? You're so caring. So you're trying to really help children, and you're giving them feedback on who they are, and you're bringing in that rich language that of emotional literacy into family life. One of the greatest important aspects of providing that space and context before learning, before bed, is having a calm environment. And a calm environment is so important to children's well-being. It does not mean your house is not rowdy and you have laughs and you have arguments, but in general, it should be as calm and stable and consistent as possible. And that means your child is given the very, very best opportunity to thrive. The other thing I would say is my last two slides, make sure you try and diffuse. Well, if you can afford a Joe Malone diffuser, great. I can't. If you can't, another cheaper, better thing to diffuse your home with is optimism, because optimism ignites resilience. And our children are relying upon us to try and be as hopeful and positive and energetic. And I know it's hard, but hopefully we are on hopefully the last lap of this experience. And, it is important to try hard to introduce all those lovely things that we've talked about that brings hope into the learning experience so that can feel positive is all good. So I absolutely believe that all of us have done a great job. All of us can improve. Everyone, myself included, we can do better again. And thinking about how we're giving ourselves a pat on the back for what we've done well, and always looking to, that week after half term, how can we do it even better? How can we make this, inject this last lap with a bit more energy, and making sure we have made the most of lockdown learning with our children. So thank you very much for listening. And I'm very, very happy to take questions. Okay, my daughter in year 2 gets so downhearted when something goes wrong. How can I help her see mistakes as part of learning? Well, I think that she needs practice getting things wrong, potentially in other contexts, and then you jump in with your facial expression, say, well done. You start valuing her making the mistakes and valuing the fact that she is able to think about how to correct it. So our response is very, very important. And we're learning to ride our bike. Maybe you can even talk about that experience of, and just let her reflect on the experience of riding a bike. And sometimes we make mistakes, and and modeling, try and explicitly model making a mistake and her hearing what your self-talk is, how you talk to yourself when you make a mistake can be very, very important. The other thing is you can actually buy resources, a book, I can't remember the name of it, but it has mistakes in the title, and the importance of mistakes for children of that age, where they talk about, in the book, all the greatest innovators in the world and inventors and architects. They don't just design a building, they rub it out, they try again. So there are books that can actually promote that normalization of mistakes in family life. What do you think is the biggest risk to children from this lockdown? The biggest risk, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, is the denial of play and the denial of social contact with their friends. So, I think under the government rules, the children, they're allowed to exercise. We're allowed to exercise with one other person. So whatever you can do within the government guidelines, do it. Children, the only child at the bottom of our street, we've been doing remote control cars with him so that he has some sort of sense of play and interaction with children, with peers. So the denial of play is the biggest risk. And not being able to, develop for adolescents, be out with their friends, the threat to, they've no idea who they are, and they have to try and learn to engage in that digital world, which is a bit more complex. Somebody says, my son struggles with handwriting and any written assignments. He says he can't do it. I want to encourage him without nagging, but I can't sit next to him all day to get him to do the work. He's 9. The first thing I would say, because he's 9 and you think he's struggling with the handwriting, I would try and have a word with his teacher, just to see. I don't know what, I would explore that and think about those written assignments. Do they have to be handwritten? Sometimes they can be typed. I don't know, but I think it's important to to ask the teacher about his handwriting. I think we need to explore why he thinks he can't do it, and just listen to him and see if he can come up with solutions that might make it feel a little bit better. So it's always about making small chunks, making small achievable chunks. So you might say to him, just write 3 lines, and you might use a sand timer and just give him a little bit of time. So rather than writing the whole essay and mummy's gone in the next room, just write the first 3 sentences and praising him. But it sounds like, and this is me, totally speculating, that he might feel a little bit anxious about writing, and I might be wrong, but that's what I'm sort of feeling intuitively. So it would be good to know if, you can think about whether he is a little bit anxious and how you can actually alleviate that before he does the learning or the writing, if that makes sense. I hope that's helpful. Any other questions? I'm very happy, by the way, if you want me to go back on any slides so you can have a little look at them, just ask me, and I'm very happy to do that. Okay, so there are no more questions. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening. Good news is it's Wednesday tomorrow. So we're nearly there. We're nearly there to the finish line of this week. And I'm delighted to be here, and I hope that maybe you've picked up 1 or 2 tips this evening. Thank you so much for listening.